Hi folks, Josh Clark here, WSA's Restoration Coordinator. I'm going to be talking to you today about some pointers and tips for managing your rainscoping capstone. The topics we're going to be talking about are some reminders about the scope that you should be getting into right now with your project. We're going to go over some reminders about your budget, and we're also going to give you some pointers about what your schedule should look like and some other considerations and tips that we've kind of come up with over the last years. So first, I want to remind you exactly what your capstone should be looking like in regards to scope. Just a reminder, your rainscaping capstone should come directly from your community assessment. It should really be borne out from what you're seeing in your community. It should be visible, and being visible, it should be replicable by others in your community. You really want to be creating a project that others can see and do in their own yards. And ideally, your installations will also be capturing stormwater as closely to where it falls as possible. This is a really important reminder. The goal of doing a capstone project is not to install a great project. The goal of your capstone project is to demonstrate to your community a practice that they could replicate on their own property and to introduce yourself as a resource for empowering them to take action. So just some reminders here, if you have some questions about what your capstone should be, under your session 2 on the website, there's a presentation called What is a Capstone Project that Suzanne put together. That's a really good resource to kind of review and remember going into your work. You can also take a look at the Rainscaping Capstone Project Scope document that was provided to you during that session. And don't forget that I'm always available to schedule office hours and we can discuss if you're running into any questions or are worried that you're biting off more than you can chew. The next thing that I want to talk to you about is some of the budget things that should be on your mind right now. Some pointers or some ways to kind of frame your budget is to remember exactly what items you need to purchase. Are there any services that you need to purchase? Or are there any contractors that you need to talk to? Anything like that. Another big thing that you might run into is what is the cost and availability of those items and services? For items specifically with plants, you might run into a situation where certain species might not be available, so you want to kind of time that out, and I'm absolutely happy to work with you. And if you're looking to contract with a different landscaping company to do prep work or to do any part of the installation, you have to keep in mind their availability and their schedule as well. And the big thing, the number one thing with the budget really is how will these costs be funded? So as you're working through your budget template and you're developing exactly what the costs for your project look like, you really want to make sure that you're balancing the books. You don't want to be in the red. This is another thing that myself or your mentor or other WSA staff members can help you with, but we can absolutely work through making sure that you have enough money to fund your project. So we're going to get into the main part of this presentation. These are some scheduling pointers and some rules that you should probably follow. And kind of jumping into that, these are some big points that I want you to remember. Every capstone is different because every community is different and every steward is different. So this is definitely not a time to really be comparing yourself to other stewards or anything like that. Just trust that the WSA staff, myself included, will be kind of directing you to a tailored fit situation that makes sense for you. Remember that it's a marathon and not a sprint. You have all the time in the world to complete this. We want you to do a good job. We don't want to rush anything. And as we've said multiple times, if you're not having fun, something is wrong. So if you're getting frustrated or you're running into walls or roadblocks that are really starting to take away from the fun part of becoming a steward, schedule office hours, give us a call. We can work through what those problems are and we can get you to a resolution. So when you're thinking through your schedule and your considerations that go into it, there's some kind of 30,000-foot things that you want to keep in mind. So what are the tasks that need to be done? Who will be doing each task? What is the order that the task should be done in? And what tasks should be completed before other tasks begin? This is a great little cartoon that Suzanne has shared in the past. You know, having an idea of your schedule is really important. Trying to keep in mind not just where you're at now, but where you might be 3 steps down the road is really important when you're kind of planning out your project schedule. An easy way to do that is literally to take Post-it notes and write down on your Post-it notes a single item um, that you know will be going into your project, whether that's installing the plants or buying the plants, getting permits, whatever. Think through what your project is and break them up into chunks so that you have kind of a plethora of pieces, and then you take those pieces and you put them into a logical, chronological order. As I said before, each project's going to be different. You should be relying on the WSA staff for guidance to make sure that things make sense, and we can really help you work through it. But what you might be looking at right now is a schedule that looks like this. So from March to April of this year, especially if you're doing your installations in the fall, most of you have completed your site visit, you're engaging your stakeholders, and you're really trying to determine what the scope of your project looks like. As you get into late spring and into the summer, this is when you're really developing and finalizing your designs. You're completing permitting if you need to, and you're really starting to work through your engagement events. And then as you get into the fall, when the temperatures are actually starting to drop and it's more appropriate to plant, that's when you're starting to schedule your installation. And there's some key components to that, making sure that you have your volunteers lined up, that you're working on ordering your plants and your mulch or whatever other materials that you need to have for your project. And that's something that you're definitely going to want to talk to me about. I can work through that with you and what that looks like. You'll see under the session review documents for this week that there is plant ordering protocols there. There's also a checklist that kind of games out what you're looking for from month to month. And again, the protocols for the plant orders are pretty specific. They kind of work for all projects, but that checklist can really be tailored to what you're looking for your own specific project. Like I said, once the temperatures really do stabilize, that's when you're going to start thinking about your installation. I would ask that as you're thinking through or finalizing your installation date, that you communicate that to me so that we can get it onto the WSA calendar, um, so that we can ensure that you have a safety leader, that you have staff support, that you have everything you need, so that that can kind of be equitably distributed throughout the class. After the installation, as you get into the fall, into the winter, into next spring, into the summer, it's all about maintenance. Making sure that you have a clear maintenance plan is really important, and that's not going to be the first time that we touch on this. And we're going to talk about this at the session next week, but a key component to being a steward is getting counted for the work you do. Francesca will be putting a presentation together to show you exactly how to report your hours, but I just wanted to introduce that here because that is a really key part of your projects. So I've been talking about support that WSA gives to you. Really, a big thing here is project mentoring. Most of you in the Rainscaping track will have me as your mentor. Some of you folks I've talked about having other steward mentors or other staff folks working with you. But those are the folks that are going to really help you kind of direct and get your design from being on paper and into the ground. As I mentioned just a minute ago, we will absolutely help you order your plants and your materials. Like I said, the plant ordering protocols are on the website, and that really kind of sets up the step-by-step how that happens. As your project comes together and other materials come together, we have suppliers all over the place that cover a wide variety of different things. And as you're thinking through what you might like to have in your project, just work it out with me, and we can figure out where to source it. Um, Typically, we don't do the designs for you. That's a key component of something that you're working through. That's why the conservation landscape tool is really important. But that doesn't mean that you can't ask for help or ask for pointers or ask for us just to take a look. So whether that's me or your mentor, as you're developing your designs, we are happy to take a look at that. We're happy to look at your species selections. And again, we're always happy to meet with you during office hours to make sure that you're on the right path. I'll talk about outreach materials here in a minute, but there is a plethora of stuff that we have developed over the years that could really be tailored to your project. Another nice thing about working with WSA is that we have a very robust network that we can publicize to. So as you're trying to develop volunteer plans or getting people to know that your project is happening and you're looking for help, we can get that out into the network and make sure that you get the support you need. And lastly, the big thing, especially in the time of COVID, that I want to make sure that reiterate here is that we do have the COVID-19 safety protocols in place. So just remember, we just had a big session on those. They're up under session 10. You can kind of work through and keep in mind that you should be designing your protocols to your installation. If you keep in mind that during that presentation that there was a project that you can kind of take as a template, that's a good starting point. But I'm also very much happy to help you work through and see what that needs to look like. Um, from there, the great thing is you don't have to worry about getting a safety leader for your project. Once you get us your date, we can coordinate an actual safety leader who's been trained by WSA to come out and work on your project. So again, with your project mentoring, you're really looking at your site visits. You have had your initial visit with me, and as we talk about getting your project into the ground, there might be a need for additional site visits, which we can work out and schedule. We're also here to give you the technical and budgetary advice that you're going to need. Again, as you're developing your budget, you're worried about how you're going to pay for things. That works. Um, if you're having questions about is this big enough? Is this the appropriate size rain barrel? Is this the right plant at the right place? That's something that we can absolutely talk about. And that usually happens in office hours. I think a lot of you folks have had an opportunity to meet with me on Wednesdays. And a lot of you also know that I'm very much happy to meet when it is more convenient with you. Just let me know. And then with the project installation, I mentioned earlier that we really want to make sure that we know when you're scheduling because we absolutely want to be there. We want to celebrate you. We want to help take pressure off of you on the day of the project. So that's something that, as we're organizing and getting the logistics worked out, we'll make sure that we have a staff person to help you. So again, with the plant and material ordering, I have the plant ordering protocols up. That'll be provided for you going into next week. We draw from so many suppliers, and the great thing about working with WSA is that we do have things set up that we get things for wholesale prices. We have a breakdown of what you might be looking at for the prices of different size plants. So for example, for perennials, if it's a quart size, if you budget for $3, that's a good place to start. For a gallon, you're probably looking at $5. And for a shrub at the 3-gallon size, you're probably looking at about $20. But because WSA is a nonprofit organization, a 501c3, we're also tax exempt. So that's another reduction in the cost that we can, completely give to our stewards. Um, you might run into a question about exactly how many or how much you need as you're developing your design. That's another place that I can help you kind of work through that. And then beyond that, we're a very robust network of not only just stewards, but we also have contractors and consortium folks that might be able to help with the project or you can contract with that will be able to help make your dreams a reality. So as I was mentioning with the design check and check-ins, really rely on the conservation landscape tool. That's a great place to start. We can connect you with contractors or consultants that you could actually work with to actually get some design work done. That might be a little bit more expensive. I think trying to keep it in-house based off of your conservation landscape tool and working with me, I think that's going to be the best. And like I said, my bread and butter is design. I'm a landscape architect. I'm happy to review and give you feedback as you're developing those. As I said, with the outreach materials, we have a whole slew of things. And Francesca, as the steward engagement specialist, is kind of the keeper of all of those. As you're really finalizing what your capstone looks like, feel free to reach out to Francesca and discuss with her what might be available to really complement your project. So from there, with the publicizing of the project, again, this is another example of where we can really tailor what that looks like for your project. We know different networks that we can get people out for stream cleanups or invasive removals. There's a lot of contacts that we have in our Rolodex that you can kind of lean on. Again, this should really complement the outreach that you are planning for your capstone, the 3 required outreach events. And that's something that we can absolutely work with you to do. And if you get all of your details of what you're thinking about to me, I can talk to Katie Foster, who's our communications coordinator, and make sure that you get the support from her that you might need as you move forward with publicizing your event. So from there, we're going to walk into some of the lessons learned that we have kind of cultivated over the last few years. We're going to touch on misutility. We're going to have the reminder about the right-of-way. We're going to talk about the property owner agreement. We're going to talk about permits, and we're going to talk about some pointers about recruiting volunteers. So anytime you put a shovel into dirt, you really should be calling misutility. I cannot stress this enough. It's a very easy service to use. It's a free service to use. You can either call 811 or you can visit missutility.net. They will ask you a series of questions. You should be approaching this as the resident, and they will come out and mark all of the public utilities that are on your site. Now, keep in mind that they will not mark private utilities, so that's something to keep in mind, whether that is irrigation lines or private electric lines that might go to lights. Those are things that you're going to want to think about. But as I'm out on site visits with you, I can help you identify what they may be. Again, this is an absolute must to do. It is incredibly expensive if you hit a utility line and sever a cable cord or something like that. But the good news is if you're out on site and you've called misutility and you hit something, that's the fail safe. You've actually done what you need to do. Our recommendation is to call misutility around 2 weeks before your installation so they have plenty of time to come out and mark their lines. Typically, that's a good span. They'll come out with spray paint, which will stick around until your installation. So as I mentioned, avoiding the right-of-way is a big deal. You don't want to install a conservation landscape up against a road that will then come through and get mowed down by the county. GIS gives you a pretty good indication of where those lines are. If you follow property plat lines, that's a good place to start. And if you're not sure, just check in with me and we can try to figure it out. One thing that I want to stress here, and you're going to see an example of a property owner agreement on tonight's or on next Tuesday night's pre-session material. But we do ask, as you're working with property owners, that they have some buy-in. And typically what that looks like is that we have a property owner agreement that gets signed by the person who can make capital improvements on your site. So sometimes that's a homeowner, sometimes that's a board of trustees person for a church. Whoever has the authority to sign off on having the project go into the ground, that's who you really need to be working with. Our property owner agreements are tailored to each project. They change from homeowners to churches, institutional properties, all of that stuff. They are tailored to what you need. And that's something that you will develop with me. So as you're diving into the property owner agreement, as the project's coming together, I will work with you one-on-one to make sure that you have exactly what you need with that. Permits are something that some of you might run into. There's different things that you'll need to keep in mind. I would suggest reviewing the Session 9 documents, specifically the permit cheat sheet. That's a pretty good walkthrough of if this, then that. But if you are in doubt or if you have any questions, you can check in with me. And as I'm reviewing your projects, that's something that will be at the forefront of my mind, just to make sure that you're dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's and making sure that you have plenty of time to get those in if they're needed. So as you're thinking about getting your project in the ground, volunteers become really important. So this is the really key part of outreach. The 3 required outreach events, the 3 touches that you do with the community are a really good way of recruiting your volunteers. You're introducing your projects, you're getting that in front of folks. And what you're really looking for is an engaged labor force who really cares about the project and is excited about it. So as you're developing your outreach, you're really thinking about what would get people excited to actually help me do this. So from there, I'm going to talk about the day of. These are some things that come into focus as you're actually getting to the whole thing. You've worked through your capstone proposal, you've done all the requirements, you've gotten your design, you've ordered your plants, and the day of happens. It can be intimidating, but it should be a lot of fun. First and foremost, you should be taking care of yourself. Anything you can do beforehand, you should be doing. And again, WSA staff is really here to help you make sure that you're setting yourself up for success. One thing that you can always rely on is that folks are going to arrive early. So typically, if you're wanting to start a planting, say at 10 o'clock, you should probably try to be there an hour earlier, just so you have plenty of time to kind of get oriented and make sure that if folks are arriving early, you're ready to go. You really should think through safety reminders beyond just COVID, which the safety lead will do. You might want to demonstrate, you probably shouldn't be swinging a shovel around. Or if you have a saw removing invasive species, you probably shouldn't be swinging that around. Safety is really paramount to these projects. And that's something that you want to keep in mind for yourself, but you also want to remind your volunteers. And it's always a good idea on the day of to start the whole installation with showing folks how to properly plan a plant. As we get into that conversation, I will actually have on the site tonight a video demonstration that we put together last spring showing the proper way to do that. You really should be delegating tasks, and this bleeds into the next part here. You should be free. You should not be assigning any job to yourself. Imagine yourself as the go-to person the day of your event. You should not be the ones really getting your hands dirty. Your volunteers should be doing that. You can delegate to WSA staff. We're really there to help you, and we're your minions that day. So you really get to tell us what to do. But I cannot stress enough that you should really be free the day of your installation so that you can make sure that your project's going in exactly how you want it to go in. So after your installation, the big thing is really making sure, again, you're taking care of yourself. You're celebrating a job well done. Pre-COVID, we would have a celebration with food or whatever. You might consider these days putting together a happy hour online or getting social media blasts out on your own personal social media, on your community social media, and on the WSA social media. A big thing that goes a long way is thanking your participants, making sure that your volunteers are thanked. Also, think about projects that you've been on. That's always something nice to see and something to get. And I cannot stress enough having a clear idea of what maintenance is going to be for your project. Maintenance, maintenance, maintenance. The first step of the project is getting the installation done. You're wanting to make sure that you are maintaining things over the lifetime of your installations. That brings us to the end of this presentation. I will say as we get into session 11, we're going to cover some other outliers. We're going to have a brief discussion about a case study, some of the what went wrong here kind of deal. But then Francesca is also going to be talking about some of our risk management policies and talking to you about exactly what forms we have, what protections we have in place. And then we're also going to be talking about our steward hour reporting. That's something that we have not really touched on yet, but Tuesday night will be the night. But if any of you have questions about any of the stuff that I've just presented on, feel free to let me know. And from there, thank you for listening. Questions come up, shoot me an email and we can go from there. Thank you.